Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special Ask the Regulators program. Today's topic, executive leadership of cybersecurity, what today's CEO needs to know about the threats they don't see. This is Eric Sell. I'm with the Federal Reserve. I am going to get us started today. So with that, I am going to jump to slide 2, and I'm seeing that happen on the webinar. So first of all, we've provided the dial information here, should you guys need it, and a reminder that we record all of these sessions. And what we'll do is provide an audio file of this session to each regulator, and they can post as they see fit. But we do record these calls. I want to make sure you guys know that. Many of you are watching via the webinar tool. So if you are there right now, just a couple of notes. First, you can always expand the presentation by clicking the small button in the window right in the presentation. It's right above the started word on the current slide. You'll see it there. You can click that button. It'll expand the presentation. If you're not in the webinar right now, we will make sure to say what slide we're on as we're advancing through. So just so we're covering all the bases there. We will take questions at the very end. So please feel free to use the chat feature in the webinar via the Ask Question button at the very bottom of the screen. You'll see that there. Or you can always email us directly at asktfed@stls.frb.org as well, and you'll see that email address there. So just a little bit about the FFIEC. The FFIEC, or Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council, is hosting today's webinar. The members of the FFIEC include the Fed, the CFPB, the FDIC, the NCUA, the OCC, and the State Liaison Committee, which is comprised of 5 representatives of state agencies that supervise financial institutions. Okay, we do have a legal disclaimer. I'm going to give that right now. This presentation is a program for financial institutions supervised by FFIEC members and federal and state examiners, and is not intended for or available to the general public. Use of these materials, including video and audio recording of this presentation, is strictly prohibited except by written permission of the FFIEC or its members. The opinions expressed in this presentation are intended for informational purposes and are not formal opinions of, nor binding on, the FFIEC or its members. Okay, I am going to jump to slide 3, and I see that moving over there. So it is my pleasure to welcome the FFIEC Chairman and Comptroller of the Currency, Thomas Curry.
Thank you all for joining today's discussion regarding executive leadership of cybersecurity. Vulnerabilities that were once relegated to the back office or data center have become risks that permeate every facet of the financial services industry. CEOs and senior executives play a vital role in managing cybersecurity risks. As executive leaders, you need to ensure that there is appropriate risk management and governance in place so that the right information is flowing to the right people throughout your organization and to your boards of directors. It is important that all institutions are aware of the threats, understand their risks, and work within your organizations as well as with your service providers and your peers across the industry to share information to ensure security and resilience of your institutions in the face of increasingly sophisticated cyber threats. As you will hear from the FSISAC during this webinar, sharing information can be an important tool towards mitigating cyber threats as they evolve. As I've said before, community institutions play a vital role in supporting local economies throughout our country, and therefore are a critical part of the nation's financial system. Unfortunately, as we speak, cyber criminals from all over the world are attempting to attack banks of all sizes, including community institutions. These cyber attacks seek to exploit vulnerabilities to steal money, prevent financial organizations from offering services, inflict reputational harm, and undermine confidence in the banking system. There are few issues more important to me and to the other members of the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council than ensuring that financial institutions' defenses, as well as that of their service providers, are able to protect our industry against cyber attacks. That is why last year the Council established a Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Working Group to collaborate across all banking regulators on this important issue. This group is already meeting with intelligence, law enforcement, homeland security, and industry officials to make sure we have accurate and timely threat information and to inform our supervisory process so that we are doing what is necessary to help institutions protect themselves and their customers from the growing risk posed by cyber attacks. This working group is developing awareness initiatives, such as this webinar, to help financial institutions, particularly community institutions and credit unions, understand the risks posed by cyber attacks. Additionally, the FFIEC recently released joint statements on two specific types of cyber attacks: distributed denial of service attacks and cyber attacks on small to medium-sized institutions that result in large dollar value ATM cash outs. Both of these types of attacks will be discussed during the webinar. Looking ahead, the bank regulatory agencies will continue to collaborate through the FFIEC to assess the risks from cyber attacks to financial institutions and critical service providers. We know that many of our community institutions and credit unions depend on service providers for their critical banking functions, and some of these providers support hundreds of institutions. It is important that institutions assess and manage their risks. This includes ensuring that your service providers have adequate controls and processes in place to protect the institution and your customers. Most importantly, I want to stress that cybersecurity is not only an IT issue. It is an operational risk issue that requires senior management and board-level attention. Recent cybersecurity breaches at retailers and sophisticated DDoS attacks demonstrate that the impact to institutions and their customers goes well beyond technology issues to include real financial and reputational implications. I hope you'll find today's discussion valuable as we work together to improve financial institutions' security and resilience against cyber attacks. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That is a great way to set the stage for today's discussion, so thanks for doing that. What I'd like to do is turn the program over to Matt Baloris. Matt is Deputy Director in the Office of Consumer Protection with the NCUA, and Matt will serve as our moderator and introduce the remainder of today's program. What I'm going to do is jump over to slide 4 with the agenda. So, Matt, let me welcome you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you to all those attending today. Good afternoon, and welcome to this event. Today's financial institutions are critically reliant upon technology to conduct day-to-day business operations and to deliver services to consumers. Increasing technological reliance and complexity has also brought increased risk as criminal groups, nation states, and hacktivists are exploiting this reliance and using technology as a vector to attack financial institutions. Today's webinar will discuss cyber threats to the financial services sector and your role as a CEO in managing the related risks. We will highlight the importance of public-private partnerships, such as the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or FFIEC, and we'll also allow time before we end to take some of your questions. Myself, as well as the following two presenters, are participants on the FFIEC's Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Working Group, or CCIWG, that the Comptroller spoke of. In order of speaking, today's presenters are Philip Hinkle, Director of IT Security Examinations with the Texas Department of Banking; Chris Olson, Supervisory Financial Analyst from the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System; Bill Nelson, CEO of FFIEC; and Doreen Eberley, Director of Risk Management Supervision with the FDIC and Chair of the FFIEC's Task Force on Supervision. Let's turn to slide 5, and I will hand the presentation over to Philip to discuss why it is important for CEOs and executive officers to be engaged in a discussion about cybersecurity. Philip?
Thanks, Matt, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. I want to remind everyone that what you'll hear today is not a policy statement. This is not a technical discussion. It's intended to be just a plain language presentation to to help CEOs from community institutions understand the serious nature of the growing risks from cyber threats, as well as some of the things that you can do to protect your institution. But I want to start by addressing the question that's on your screen, which is, why are we holding an IT or a cyber webinar for CEOs and senior executives? That's normally something for your operations staff or your IT department. The reason is that electronic systems we rely on are vulnerable to attack, but also because a fundamental shift has occurred in how fraud is committed and how institutions are attacked. The banking world, or actually the whole world in general, has changed a great deal since many of you and I began banking careers. The ledger cards are gone, the typewriters are gone, and so are the big computer monitors with green screens. But what has also changed, and this applies to those of you that have always been around technology and banking, what has also changed is that managing the risks of a bank or a credit union is no longer about just what I'll call number crunching, financial analysis, managing earnings, liquidity, capital, et cetera. What all of us learned about banking as our careers advanced did not include managing cyber threats. And what we did hear about IT, about technology, was that it's machinery, very complicated machinery controlled by complicated software, which at times has its own language that sounds completely foreign. And for these reasons, technology has frequently just been treated as a back office machinery. We forget about it until a problem occurs. And IT security has also been treated like technology, treated as a compliance activity. I mean, have you ever asked, have we done everything on the checklist? Have we done everything the examiners want, everything the auditors want? That thought process of treating cybersecurity as a compliance activity is a common problem that needs attention in many institutions. Ask yourself, do I treat cybersecurity as a compliance issue? Or have I set a theme so my staff thinks about cybersecurity as they evaluate transactions and new products and services? The risks to community institutions from cyber attacks are very real and they're growing. They're much more than a technology machinery problem for your tech staff to fix. That's why the FFIEC Cyber Working Group that Chairman Curry mentioned was created, and that's why this webinar is being held. We know that cyber attacks are no longer being mostly directed at larger institutions. For example, back in September of 2012, the FBI and FFIEC sent out an alert that the wire transfer systems of smaller banks and credit unions were being specifically targeted by thieves. You can imagine the damage that can be done by someone that gets control of your internal wire transfer system. Just a few weeks ago, the FFIEC released a joint statement on a type of large dollar ATM fraud that the Secret Service characterized as an unlimited operation because it allows criminals to withdraw money beyond the balances in a customer's accounts and beyond other control limits set for the ATM. And criminals have been targeting small and medium-sized financial institutions with this fraud. We'll discuss briefly in our next section how that fraud works, but I'll mention that one recent attack netted over $40 million using only 12 debit card accounts. These attacks against wire transfer and ATM controls are just a couple of examples of where cyber criminals are targeting smaller institutions. And the attacks are becoming increasingly sophisticated, and that can make managing cyber risks challenging for CEOs whose banking careers and education have historically been focused on finance. But as challenging as it is, community institutions need to be considering the consequences from cyber attacks as part of their overall risk management and not treat it just as an IT issue. And when we say managing cyber risk, we're talking about more than just having policies and standards in place, but also having a process that enables the policies and standards to adapt and change because the cyber threats will continue to change. This governance process should include having your staff monitor and report new risks to you, along with potential solutions, so you can make risk-based decisions. And that's an important component because each new business decision and technology investment can expose your institution to new vulnerabilities that can serve as avenues for cyber attacks. Unless you have a strong cyber risk management process, your institution may be exposed to a variety of risks from cyber attacks, including operational, reputation, and financial. And since today's banking systems are dependent upon technology, it's essential that you understand cyber risks. You may not have had your wire transfer system infiltrated, and you may not have been the victim of an ATM cash out fraud or had a customer that was a victim of a corporate account takeover. But these things are happening to community banks and credit unions, so you should not assume they couldn't happen to your institution. And they're happening in part because technology is rapidly evolving and criminals are moving faster to exploit vulnerabilities, and we're moving to identify and develop solutions to those vulnerabilities. Let's look at our next slide now, slide number 6. As technology has evolved, so have the methods to deliver financial services. We've gone from the wide acceptance of ATMs in the 1980s to internet banking in the 2000s, and now the use of mobile devices and social media. Just look how rapidly technology has recently advanced even. The iPhone was only introduced in 2007, just 7 years ago, and iPads are even newer. But look how common they are today. Your ability to meet consumer demand for new tools will challenge your ability as a CEO to identify and manage the new risks that come with them. Also, technology advancements have led to much higher number of interconnected systems. Financial institutions have extensively connected their systems with third parties. Each connection your institution makes to the systems at a third party has the potential to introduce risk to your data, to your customers, and ultimately to you. And it also means that a cyber attack at any one of your third-party connections or any of their connections could impact you. Let's now go to our next slide, slide number 7. Technology advances have made it easy for even the most unsophisticated attacker to buy crimeware tools or hire criminal cyber services or watch an online tutorial to learn how to attack financial institutions. But not only is technology evolving, but so are the individuals that perpetrate crimes and attacks. Instead of just criminals focused on financial gain, now there are individuals or groups with different motives and different capabilities. And since individuals and groups that perpetrate attacks now are more than just criminals, the term threat actor is also used to describe them, which is what we'll talk about now. Most threat actors fall into one of 4 categories, and they're listed here above the colored boxes on your screen. Nation states, hacktivists, organized criminals, and insiders. They can all adversely impact you and your customers with little to no warning. Nation states are foreign governments that sponsor cyber attacks to commit espionage or steal proprietary information, such as national security secrets, research and development information on new products, or market data, to name a few. They may even launch a cyber attack in advance of or during an armed conflict, or they may do so in response to governmental policies or decisions, or to disrupt or undermine confidence in a banking system. Hacktivists are another category of threat actors. These are often groups of people, but sometimes they're only one person, and they conduct cyber attacks to make political statements or to gain national or international attention. Organized criminals are the best-known category. They have sophisticated business processes for stealing and laundering money, and they have technology tools for committing multiple types of fraud. Insiders are the last category of threat actors. These are individuals who either knowingly or unknowingly assist in a cyber attack. Sometimes they steal data to pass it along to criminals for personal gain. Sometimes they pass secrets along to foreign governments. Let's move now to slide number 8. Let's talk about some specific attacks from each threat actor category and the impacts that they could have on financial institutions. As you'll see here in the top arrow, a nation state could send spear phishing emails to install malicious software, sometimes called malware, on an institution's network, leading to the theft of intellectual property. This type of event can lead to financial loss, not just from the loss of stolen property, but also the cost to clean the malware from the system. Here in your second arrow, a hacktivist group might conduct a distributed denial of service attack or a DDoS attack to cause reputation harm by limiting customers' access to online banking services. This poses reputational risk to an institution, but it also costs money to defend against the attack. In the next arrow, organized criminals. They might launch an ATM cash-out scheme that results in millions of dollars being stolen over a weekend from just one institution. You can imagine the impact to your own institution if you were the victim of this kind of an attack. An insider is a person at an institution that might facilitate identity theft by stealing a database of customer accounts and selling it to organized criminals. The loss of the customer's personally identifiable information can certainly lead to reputation risk, but it can also expose an institution to lawsuits from customers that are victimized by the theft. Let's turn now to slide number 9. And here we see that both the likelihood and the impact of cyber risk is growing. The likelihood of attacks is increased because the number of threat actors with the capabilities to conduct attacks is increasing. And because of their access to technology, they're able to launch not only more attacks than in the past, but also more complex attacks. And our society's rapid adoption of new technologies, such as mobile applications, smart devices, and social media, has given threat actors greater ability to take advantage of vulnerabilities in these new technologies. This has caused increased concern about the impact of cyber risk into the future. An example of this increasing likelihood and impact of cyber attacks relates to DDoS attacks. A DDoS attack against your website would be similar to someone dialing your 10-line telephone switchboard a couple thousand times a minute. Your customers will just get a busy signal. Now, historically, we would not consider a DDoS attack likely to occur or have a high impact. But that changed in late 2012 and into 2013 when DDoS attacks were launched against some of our largest financial institutions. These attacks resulted in sporadic disruptions to the institution's online banking services over a period of months. And more recently, cybercriminals have been using DDoS attacks against smaller institutions to divert attention while they're committing large dollar theft through the institution. And that makes DDoS attacks a high-impact attack. Chris Olson, our next speaker, will talk more about DDoS attacks, but because they're relatively easy for threat actors to launch today, making them more likely to occur. Another example of a cyber attack that today has a high impact and an increased likelihood of occurring is the ATM cash-out fraud. This is a fraud that Chris will also discuss, where cyber criminals are able to withdraw money from ATMs beyond all control limits. These trends of attacks having an increased impact and increased likelihood of occurrence represents a serious and a growing threat to our industry, and we need to get ahead of them before they cause serious damage and shake customer confidence in our financial system. To summarize our first section, a key point is that cyber attacks are increasingly targeting smaller financial institutions. With each advancement in technology, there's customer demand for using new technologies to deliver banking services. But for each advancement in technology, also it makes it easier for threat actors to attack in new and more sophisticated ways. And then to address this growing problem requires CEOs that have built their careers focused on the financial aspects of banking, to move cybersecurity from being a back office IT issue to a front office risk management process. And that concludes our first section of the webinar. Back to you, Matt.
Thank you, Philip. And now we'll have Chris Olson with the Federal Reserve, another member of the CCIWG, discuss cyber risk management and how it relates to these threats Philip just highlighted for us. Chris?
Thank you, Matt. In this section, starting with slide 10, we will cover 4 risk management topics that are important to CEOs relative to cybersecurity governance, threat intelligence, third-party relationships or vendor management, and incident response and resilience. As Philip noted, the financial services sector is facing high-impact, high-likelihood threats that will require better risk management. The topic of cybersecurity can be overwhelming, but getting a grip on these 4 concepts is a vital first step. You are familiar with managing credit and liquidity risk and have a keen sense of those environmental factors that impact your institution. Over time, we must enhance our bank's resilience by integrating cyber risk management into business processes as a business-as-usual activity. Regulators want to see evidence that vendor risk is managed over the life of contracts and that threat intelligence is used to inform risk assessments, and of course that appropriate governance processes exist that are capable of addressing increasing cybersecurity risk. It is possible to improve how we manage the escalating cybersecurity threat facing our sector. Financial institution executives should strive to create an effective risk governance process to enable proper oversight and ensure that you're effectively managing cybersecurity risk. We will discuss key elements of risk governance that provide assurance of effective cybersecurity risk management. Let's get started and move to slide 11. The governance and risk assessment process should inform senior management and the board on what are the risks to your institution, how your institution manages them, and who is accountable. This graphic highlights the key risk management elements that are critical to ensure effective governance. Senior management and the board are responsible for creating a cybersecurity governance process that will assess new threats, determine risks specific to their institutions, identify gaps in current policies, procedures, and controls, and update these as necessary to mitigate new risks. Staff should provide risk assessments regularly to senior management and the board so that you have access to and can act on reliable and accurate information to ensure that cyber risks are properly managed. These assessments should include threats, vulnerabilities, and the mitigating controls focusing on the most likely and potentially impactful risks to your institution. Depending on the level of risk, there should be a clear process for escalating events to senior management and the board. With the assessment in hand, senior management should be able to identify and prioritize gaps in policies, procedures, and controls, and ensure they are updated based on the gap identification. Executives are responsible to prompt the financial institution to revisit the risk assessment or take other measures to minimize cybersecurity impact, but can only do that with proper insight. As Philip mentioned earlier, the FFIEC recently released a statement on a type of fraud that is targeting medium to small financial institutions, called ATM cash out. This fraud highlights the need for a governance program to assess the risk to your institution regarding this particular type of cyber attack. ATM cash out starts with a cyber attack directly on an institution. Through the cyber attack, criminals install malicious software on the bank's network to steal employee credentials used to access control panels that set the parameters around the institution's ATM networks. This may include how much money you allow your customers to withdraw from an ATM using debit cards or prepaid cards. Once the criminals combine this attack with account information, including account numbers and PINs they have either purchased from criminal networks, through skimming, at point-of-sale terminals, or through other attacks, the criminals can go to any ATM, not just your institution's, withdraw an unlimited amount of funds beyond the established daily ATM withdrawal parameters associated with that account. Given the complex nature of this attack, highly effective risk governance is essential. To mitigate ATM cash out and other similar frauds, you should ensure the risk governance processes include operational processes such as ongoing security assessments, security monitoring, ongoing review of access controls and exception logs, and regular testing of controls. Given that attackers continue to develop ever more sophisticated malware, it is also prudent to have and test an incident response plan to minimize damage when a breach is detected. Let's move to slide 12 now to summarize the key takeaways about governance of cybersecurity risk. The cliche that you can't manage what you can't measure is especially true in the context of cybersecurity. Governance starts with a risk assessment, and the governance process is vitally dependent on measuring the risk related to cybersecurity. What makes cyber risk management difficult is the fast pace at which new risks are introduced. The recent Heartbleed Open SSL vulnerability is a good example of the dynamic nature of cyber risks. As you think about governance, your key takeaway from this discussion is to consider how your staff is providing you with accurate and timely information about your risks and your ability to mitigate them so you can prioritize your resource allocations and inform the board. Your staff's ability to provide quality information is related to their ability to gather threat intelligence and perform a risk assessment. With this in mind, let's move to the next slide, slide 13, to discuss threat intelligence. Threat intelligence is a component that supports the overall risk governance process by informing you about the threats that are most relevant to your institution. Accurate and timely threat intelligence allows you to implement better controls by determining if a gap exists between current controls and those controls necessary to mitigate risk of the latest cyber attack. Ultimately, threat intelligence combined with business strategy provides a framework for a risk assessment. Both internal resources to your institution and external resources can be used to develop a full threat picture. You may be able to use internal audit reports or systems designed for detecting fraud to look for suspicious activity or signs of a threat. In addition, tools implemented for complying with anti-money laundering, Office of Foreign Assets Control rules, and the Bank Secrecy Act may be useful in identifying new threats. There are also a number of external resources that an institution may use, including InfraGard, which collaborates between the private sector and the FBI to identify and prevent hostile events against the U.S. In addition, U.S. Secret Service has a network of electronic crimes task forces throughout the country to bring together state, local, and federal law enforcement with the private sector to prevent crimes to the financial system and critical infrastructure. Formal information sharing networks or sector conferences can also provide timely threat intelligence. Later in this webinar, you'll hear from FFIEC, an information sharing organization that we mentioned earlier. In addition, there are a number of publicly available reports on cyber threats, some of them updated annually, such as Verizon's Data Breach Investigations Report and the Semantic Threat Report. By understanding the threat to the sector as a whole, you can begin to investigate which threats may specifically impact your institution or your customers. As highlighted in the 2011 update to the FFIEC authentication guidance, account takeover and wire frauds are a continued threat to the sector. Threats such as these are essential for you to know. These frauds take place through wire transfer. The annual volume of wire transfer amounts to many times Tier 1 capital, which represent a significant risk. Since the release of the update, corporate global account takeover losses were $455 million in 2012 and jumped to $523 million in 2013, with losses of nearly $800 million predicted by the end of 2016. These significant losses place additional strain on an institution's ability to maintain cybersecurity controls. To enhance the control environment, the institution can use existing internal detection methods, such as transaction monitoring. Let's move on to slide 14. Institutions should continue to monitor corporate account takeover and other threats to understand how cyber risk is growing and changing. The awareness you and your staff develop by studying threat intelligence allows you to identify specific vulnerabilities and risk mitigation strategies that are relevant to you, and thus help you to decide which security controls to give you the most bang for the buck. For in threat intelligence, your key takeaway may be to ask, how is my organization identifying and monitoring cyber threats and attacks both to my institution and to the sector as a whole? You may also ask, how is this information used to inform my risk assessment process, identify and prioritize gaps, and update and test policies, procedures, and controls? Given that many of you rely on third parties to protect you from cyber risk, let's turn to slide 15 and discuss third-party relationships. For many years, the FFIEC member agencies have recognized the key role and material impact third-party relationships may have on the financial services industry. For community institutions, third parties offer valuable services that extend well beyond traditional core processing. Servicers have become more complex, and the relationships among third parties often less transparent. When considering cyber threats, it is imperative that you understand clearly what a breach on your vendor's operation might mean to your institution and customers. The widespread dependence on third-party providers demands that institutions adopt risk management processes commensurate with the level of risk and complexity of services. It is essential to manage connections to vendors and consider planning, due diligence and selection, contract negotiation, and ongoing monitoring and termination of these relationships. We suggest sound vendor management practices that start with thorough due diligence and well-defined contractual terms and service agreements. As part of the due diligence process, institutions should identify third-party providers that subcontract services to one or more parties. Sometimes this involves foreign locations. In the absence of clear contract terms, your institution may be held responsible if customer information held by a third party is compromised. In addition, institutions may be victims of reputational risk for compromises at third parties. As part of your cyber defenses, third-party monitoring should include validation of critical servicer controls. Management may accomplish this by obtaining an independent audit or report of the service provider's control environment. An important example for community institutions regarding their cyber risk exposure relative to vendor management includes understanding the software that third parties use to support your business. Recently, the FFIEC issued a statement about Microsoft's plan to discontinue support for the Windows XP operating system, effective April 8th this year. As a result, Microsoft will no longer provide regular security patches, technical assistance, or support for XP unless you enter into a contract with them for an additional fee. Financial institutions and other third parties that use XP in personal computers, servers, and purpose-built devices such as automated teller machines, or that are dependent on applications that require the use of XP could be exposed to an increased operational risk. Patches are often the first line of defense for institution when a new vulnerability is identified. In this case, you need to look at both your own exposure and that of each of your service providers. Institutions should contact third-party providers to discuss what measures they have taken to mitigate XP risk. Attackers are targeting the underlying operating system, and thus mitigating controls have to be maintained carefully. Let's turn to the next slide, slide 16, to summarize the key points about third-party relationships. Examples that lend to effective vendor risk management include having a strategy to select, assess and oversee third parties, proper due diligence in the selection process, ongoing monitoring, clear roles and responsibilities, documentation that facilitates monitoring, and independent reviews to ensure the vendor aligns with your corporate strategy. Given the dynamic nature of cybersecurity risks, these steps, selection strategy, due diligence, ongoing monitoring and reporting, and independent review, should be done continuously as a part of a life cycle used to manage vendors. When thinking about third-party vendors, your takeaway may be to ask, how are we managing the third-party relationship risk management life cycle at our institution to ensure that we are selecting the best third parties and identifying, monitoring, and mitigating the risk exposure for third parties? Let's turn to slide 17 to discuss incident response. No matter the amount of risk mitigation an institution implements, your organization must be prepared for cyber attacks and understand how you will respond. It is helpful to have your cybersecurity and business continuity activities coordinated. Institutions should have incident response plans that identify clear roles and responsibilities in the case of a cyber attack. As part of the incident response process, management should communicate their expectations to their employees as to when and how to escalate when an event occurs. Depending on the situation, institutions may need to involve a wide range of stakeholders, including customers, third parties, regulators, law enforcement, employees, the board, and even information sharing forums. Institutions may be able to leverage business continuity plans as a starting point for identifying critical business activities, processes, and supporting applications. As part of these plans, institutions may need to work very closely with their service providers to mitigate and respond. The FFIEC member agencies expect institutions to address these cyber attacks as a part of ongoing information security, business continuity, and disaster recovery plans. As mentioned earlier, recently the FFIEC released a statement on distributed denial of service attacks outlining these requirements. Financial institutions of all sizes that experience DDoS attacks may face a variety of risks, including operational and reputation risks. If the attack is coupled with attempted fraud, a financial institution may also experience fraud losses, liquidity, and capital risks. As senior leaders at your financial institution, consider and ask the question, which of your business lines are most susceptible to DDoS attacks? Do you have arrangements with alternate service providers or otherwise have the capacity to recover operations in the event of a cyber attack on your critical internet-facing applications? Let's now turn to slide 18 to identify the key incident response and resilience takeaways. We started this section on cybersecurity risk management with a discussion of security governance and the use of threat intelligence to inform this process. We also highlighted the expectation for institutions to adopt risk management processes commensurate with the level of risk and complexity of third-party relationships. DDoS management is a key part of security governance that also emphasizes the need for business resilience. Organizations have become increasingly aware of the strategic importance of business resilience, security, and the management of operational risk. The term resiliency is being applied to a variety of efforts underway to improve on capabilities to adaptively respond to disruptive events, be they disasters, cyber attacks, or simply human error. Building a resilient organization requires a few basic things, including a clear definition of resilience, a way to measure capabilities, and a roadmap to provide direction on what must be done to improve. Institutions should ensure that security and continuity activities are well known and coordinated across the institution. Your key takeaway for incident response may be, how often is my institution testing its plan to respond to a cyber attack? And do these tests include key internal and external stakeholders? Now I'd like to turn it back to Matt and ask everyone to turn to slide 19.
Thank you, Chris. As the CEO of your community bank or credit union, it is important that you set the appropriate tone from the top. Here we have outlined key takeaways to help your institution respond to these risks. First, we encourage you to increase awareness of cyber risk across your institution and create a security-oriented culture. Let your staff know you understand the risk and are focused on mitigating the threat, and make sure they understand their responsibility for cybersecurity. Your institution needs a security culture where employees understand the importance of their role in your defenses. Encourage them to share suspicious emails prior to opening them, as well as other concerns about potential fraud or vulnerabilities with your incident response team or senior managers. As the CEO, you have the ability to truly frame how your employees view this risk. Help them to understand this is not merely a technologically problem the IT or security team can handle alone. Remind your employees they are protecting the business, the institution's reputation in your community, and the private information your neighbors expect to remain private. It's important for your employees to understand how fraud and attacks occur and that those methods are constantly changing. You should identify, measure, and monitor risk. Once this information is obtained, your institution will be able to make risk-informed decisions based on your institution's risk appetite. In addition, you must manage cyber threats the same way you manage other strategic risks. Discuss it regularly with your staff and align your IT strategy with your overall business strategy, just as you manage your other risks. Remind your staff, cybersecurity is fundamentally about identifying risk and developing recommendations for you to select for managing the risk. As noted throughout this presentation, this is not just an IT issue, but rather something each business unit must prepare for. Each business decision should take into account the risk posed by cyber threats. To ensure that cyber risks are part of your overall business decisions, you may want to utilize your governance process to ensure awareness and accountability across your institution. And lastly, engage your board. Regularly inform them of cyber threats and actions you are taking. Ensure reports to you and your board are meaningful and timely, with metrics on the institution's vulnerability to cyber risk, including trending data and potential business impacts. As the leadership, you and your board need to know how you are managing the risk. You will need to be informed of the growing risk and your institution's vulnerabilities, as they will be involved in discussions on investing in prevention strategies. Cybersecurity cannot be treated as a compliance-only exercise. For the safety and soundness of your institution, you should focus on security to make sure you protect your institution and your customers. As we've mentioned at the beginning and throughout this presentation, it is essential you understand the threat and vulnerabilities to your institution. One way to accomplish this is to become engaged in the financial sector's public-private partnership. This partnership is unlike anything else in the financial sector in that it brings together the entire sector to partner together with government for the purpose of improving the security and resilience of the financial sector. And a key player in the partnership is the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center. Let's move now to slide 20. And today we have FFIEC President Bill Nelson to share more detail about his organization. And please note that the following presenter is not an employee of the FFIEC member agencies and is expressing the opinions of FFIEC and does not represent those of the FFIEC. Let's now move to slide 21 and hear from Bill Nelson. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Matt. Information sharing is an essential element of any risk management strategy. It provides an effective tool when dealing with cyber adversaries who would subvert the integrity of the financial services industry. The FFIEC is a model for how trusted collaboration and timely intelligence can be shared. I'd like to spend the next few minutes describing some of the major elements of this model and put it in context of recent cyber attacks that we have seen against the financial services industry. The FFIEC was founded in 1999 in acknowledgement of a presidential executive order that urged the private sector to self-organize around the mission of sector-specific critical infrastructure protection. The FFIEC is a nonprofit corporation owned by its member companies. These companies include banks, credit unions, insurance companies, broker-dealers, exchanges, third-party service providers, payment processors, clearinghouses, and trade associations. It provides a formal structure and support staff to share valuable and actionable intelligence between members and with government and partners in other critical sectors. FFIEC membership has expanded significantly over the last several years. We now have over 4,700 members. This growth has been fueled by three factors. Number one, the attacks themselves, which have caused financial institutions to realize that they need to be part of a community to share information. Financial institutions are able to leverage the expertise of other financial institutions to determine how to best defend against threats. Number two, the promotion of FFIEC membership by financial services sector associations like the American Bankers Association, the Independent Community Bankers Association, the Credit Union National Association, and SIFMA, the Securities Industry Future Markets Association. FFIEC has over 30 association members, and they realize that membership in FFIEC is a benefit to their members. And finally, FFIEC has expanded its area of focus within the financial services community. Let's now move to slide number 22. The secure FFIEC web portal is a primary tool that helps members firms stay ahead of threats. Threats are published to the web portal and various email list servers. We operate with the recognition that the threats we face are sophisticated and frequently changing. Immediate, near real-time sharing of threat details and patterns is proven to help curb that threat. In many respects, there is strength in sharing because the sharing of one organization's incident becomes everyone else's defense. I've highlighted two features on this slide, the anonymous submission capability and the special interest group email list servers. These are the two primary methods that members share real-time intelligence. The FFIEC also provides a number of other services that help improve the security posture of its members. These include biweekly threat assessment calls, best practice advisories, incident response and risk mitigation recommendations, cyber exercises, and various information sharing arrangements with government, other sectors, and with vendors that provide situational awareness, intelligence, and analysis services. During an event of national or even global significance, such as what happened with the RSA Secure ID compromise or with Hurricane Sandy, FFIEC holds emergency threat calls. We also conduct regular threat exercises by supporting our government and sector exercises. Plus, we hold one of our own exercises every year called the Cyber Attack Against Payment Processes, or CAP. The CAP exercise just last year, over 588 financial institutions participated in it. It was a simulated exercise with over 50% increase in participation over the year before. This next slide, slide number 23, is a flow diagram that illustrates how the FFIEC works. In the middle, you have the FFIEC 24/7 Security Ops Center, or SOC. On the left and on the bottom are some of the non-member information sources. And on the right, you see the different areas within a member financial institution that receives and contributes information. Let's start at the top left with DHS, or the Department of Homeland Security. As part of our public-private sector partnership, FFIEC has an employee actually embedded at DHS's National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, or NCCIC, NCIC for short. That person sits on the NCIC floor and is seeing classified intelligence. Their collaboration with the U.S. CERT, FBI, Secret Service, and other agencies has become an essential element in response to incidents affecting the financial services sector. Other government sources include the U.S. Treasury, other financial sector regulators, law enforcement, including the FBI, Secret Service, and even the NYPD. FFIEC also employs vendors to provide valuable information to its members. On the bottom, you see our interaction with other ISACs, such as electricity and telecom. On the right, you see there are many different functions represented within member institutions that benefit from receiving various types of FFIEC alerts. These functions include information security, physical security, business resilience, disaster response, fraud investigations, and payments risk. And these are two-way arrows used in this diagram, and members are encouraged to contribute and share information with other members. Let's go to slide 24, and let's take a look at a case study regarding the recent retailer data breaches. Again, the theme, one organization incident is everyone else's defense. How did the FFIEC respond to the retailer data breaches? Well, an advisory was released on January 16th of this year by the Secret Service, ISAC partners, and FFIEC. The purpose of the advisory was to alert the financial institution community, including institutions and payment processors, as well as retailers, about what the investigation had found to date about this second breach. It included malware analysis, exploit of system vulnerabilities, and the techniques, tactics, and procedures used in the attack. FFIEC asked the Secret Service to give us 48 hours before this was released to develop a concrete set of risk mitigation recommendations. They gave us the time we needed to assemble payment processors, card issuers, and some of the card brands to develop several pages worth of mitigation steps. These are revolved around the following areas: network security, cash register and POS security, administrative access, and incident response. We also provided an assessment of the POS malware to our members on one of our biweekly threat calls. The assessment examined the usage of the POS malware and the growing popularity and availability of these POS malware tools. More importantly, threat indicators were provided for the network defenders. We released this advisory to all of our members and to some of the major trade associations so that they could, or the retailer trade associations, so they could share the information with their retailer members. Let's now move to the next slide, slide number 25. The FFIEC established a Community Institution Council, currently comprised actually of over 400 members, mostly with assets of $20 billion or less. Some members have only a few branches, others cover a state or partial region. The Community Institution Council meets every other month, and they discuss a variety of topics. They also have their own listserver to share information on a real-time basis. In addition, this group is in the process of developing a security toolkit with separate modules. The first module is going to be how to build a security strategy. We're planning to introduce this module during our upcoming summit, actually coming up in May. While this is being developed, we're creating a mentorship program to link smaller institutions with larger ones. This will help facilitate communication across the sector. Let's now move to slide number 26 to look at a recent example of information sharing that was actually initiated by community institutions. As mentioned earlier, Microsoft had announced last year that they would no longer provide support for their Windows XP operating system effective April 8, 2014. Members of FFIEC's Community Institution Council started to review the impact this would have on ATMs as a result of this Windows XP end of life. The reason for this concern was due to the fact that 95% of ATM machines still run on XP. The Community Institution Council members shared strategies for a number of different areas, including extending maintenance, identifying the specific ATM operating system which systems run on, and determining the risk mitigation strategy for each, extending XP support, and network isolation options to prevent potential exploits by cyber criminals. On the next slide, slide number 27, this shows how the strategies developed by the Community Institution Council were then assembled and shared with the entire FSIEC membership via an FSIEC advisory that outlined all the risk mitigation techniques that the members had come up with and shared on the Community Institution email listserver. Let's now move to slide number 28. The benefits of sharing information, whether it be for this attack or ones affecting financial institutions and their customers, include: one, it provides an early warning before similar attacks are launched against your company. It also gives one technical insights in the types of attacks and the success failure of attacks based on the defensive measures used by others. It also brings together the collective expertise of vendors, government, as well as financial institutions, subject matter experts. Also, there's no attribution, and the information is not made public. We keep the press out, and we use a thing called the traffic light protocol, which really works. Finally, there is a true sense of community on not having to go it alone. I was asked to provide some information about belonging to the FSIEC and the cost. Membership levels are a tiered structure based on the asset size of the institution. Although there is a free level, most institutions join at a higher level, with the fee being only $250 per year for institutions under $1 billion in total assets. Our website, FSIEC.com, has a tab across the top banner with information about joining. That concludes my remarks, and I look forward to any questions you may have today or in the future. Here, please find contact information at the bottom of this slide for myself and our Director of Member Services. I'll turn things back over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Bill, for providing that important information on the public-private partnership. Let's now move to slide number 29, and I will ask Doreen Eberley, Director of Risk Management Supervision with the FDIC and Chair of the FFIEC's Task Force on Supervision, to make a few concluding comments before we open things up for your questions. Welcome, Doreen.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you also to Comptroller Curry, Philip, Chris, and Bill. As you've heard during today's call, financial institutions are critically dependent upon information technology to conduct day-to-day business operations. Rapidly evolving technology, increasing sector interconnectedness, and the growing frequency and sophistication of cyber attacks directed at financial institutions requires a shift in thinking. Cybersecurity is no longer just for the back room. It's a major issue for the boardroom. As the chair of the FFIEC's Task Force on Supervision, I can assure you that cybersecurity has moved to the forefront of FFIEC discussions. In light of the increasing risks, the regulators are working together and with our institutions and their critical service providers to maintain heightened awareness to effectively identify and mitigate the risks. A recent example of this is the FFIEC press release and alert on the OpenSSL Heartbleed vulnerability. This critical vulnerability could potentially allow an attacker to compromise security on websites, email servers, virtual private networks, instant messaging, and other applications running OpenSSL. While the FFIEC members are becoming more threat aware, we don't have specific information on all applications and services running in every financial institution. Therefore, it's incumbent upon each institution to establish mechanisms for obtaining threat and vulnerability information, such as through the United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team, USCERT, portal, which is at www.us-cert.com, or through information sharing groups such as the FSIEC, which you heard about just before me. Information is the key to making informed decisions on how to address cyber risk within your institution. Just as we're asking you to become more threat aware and to enhance cybersecurity governance and risk management practices, The member agencies are also undertaking a number of initiatives to assess the vulnerabilities of financial institutions to cyber attacks and the effectiveness of their current risk management and mitigation practices. The efforts underway will complement the members' existing oversight and examination processes. One of the initiatives is a vulnerability and risk mitigation assessment pilot program consisting of a new work program and assessment tool. This new program will be incorporated into examinations of community institutions this summer. The pilot program will allow us to develop a baseline assessment of how our community institutions are managing cybersecurity risks. In order to ensure that we comprehensively assess the cybersecurity environment in which our financial institutions operate, we also plan to engage a number of the most critical technology service providers as part of our assessment. In addition to the sector vulnerability and risk mitigation assessment, the FFIEC members will also conduct a regulatory self-assessment of supervisory policies and processes to identify any gaps in guidance and examiner and financial institution training to ensure the supervisory process adequately responds to and addresses evolving risks. The results of the vulnerability and risk mitigation assessment and regulatory self-assessment will help the members to make risk-informed decisions to address gaps and prioritize necessary actions to strengthen supervisory programs. Cybersecurity is a threat that isn't going away. This is a problem that neither the government nor the private sector can solve alone. We need to work together on this issue to ensure the security and resilience of your financial institutions. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'd now like to open the question and answer period. Matt?
Thank you, Doreen. So this concludes our formal remarks. We are going to open things up now for some a Q&A time. As Eric had mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, if you'd like to submit a question, you can use the chat feature using the Ask Question or submit an email. And so with that, we do have some that we've already queued up, so I'll go ahead and just get started. First question comes in, people asking, why are we focusing on cybersecurity? Was this a response to something specific? And before I open it up to our panel, if they want to add anything, I would just touch on the fact that it's not relating to any specific event or a particular response to something specific. It's to really raise awareness on the way technology is changing, the threat actors are changing, the technology is changing, the vulnerabilities are changing, and it really touches on all aspects of institutions of all sizes, especially based on the interdependencies they have with themselves and third-party providers. So it isn't based on anything specific. It's more just to focus attention on the fact that institutions of all sizes are subject to this and need to have robust risk management practices. So our next question here, Doreen, I'm going to tee this up for you if that's okay. Why are you targeting your efforts on heightened awareness of cybersecurity to community institutions? What are you doing to heighten awareness among mid-sized or larger institutions?
Oh, sure, Matt. So, well, the FFIEC is raising awareness of cybersecurity as a safety and soundness concern facing all of our institutions, given the increase in cyber threats to the financial sector. This webinar with community institutions is really part of a larger program that includes all institutions. One example would be the recently released joint statements on the DDoS attacks and the ATM cash outs. They actually apply to all institutions. So this is really just part of a larger program.
Okay, thank you. And then, Philip, if you could take this one. We talked about some process and controls that have been around since computers came on the scene. What's different about things now and raising this awareness now?
It's a good point because in many cases, fundamentals are still the same as they always have been. But what has changed has been the speed of the attacks and the speed of the development of new techniques for committing fraud. And for that reason, your employees may not instantly recognize some of the new techniques that are coming in. And that's the reason it's so important now to have a broader culture of security. And that's the big change that I would see being needed is the speed of attacks have increased. Therefore, there needs to be a culture of security that can address those.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple more questions here on threats as they relate to financial institutions. Chris, I'm going to ask you if you could take this next one. How would you describe a cybersecurity threat for financial institutions?
So financial institutions must be vigilant to identify, prevent, mitigate, and respond to any type of cybersecurity attack. Financial institutions should implement robust risk management processes that include appropriate governance and support from senior management to properly identify, monitor, measure, and control the operational risks posed by this new threat. These risks, if exposed, can result in other types of risks to institutions, including compliance, reputational, strategic, and credit risk.
Okay. And then touching along those lines too, Chris, if you could just take this one also. How are cyber threats to community institutions different from those to mid-sized and larger institutions, and are there any associated risks?
Sure, Matt. So the threats facing small institutions can be very similar to those facing large institutions, as can be the risks, both to the individual institution and to the larger system because of the increased interconnectedness of the financial sector.
Okay, thank you. Philip, back to you for this question. If institutions much larger than mine, this person says, if institutions much larger than mine are struggling with this, how can my small institution reduce its risk given limited budgets and resources?
I think there's another question under that, and that is, I feel overwhelmed. And I think if I were in a community institution, that would be something that would be on my mind. If the large ones can't manage it, how can I do it? You have to keep in mind that on the larger institutions, they have much more complex systems and much more highly integrated systems. So their struggle comes from the complexity of that. And if anything, the smaller institution may actually be more agile in some ways and not have such challenging tasks to handle. But the important thing on this is that not all mitigating controls require extensive funding and resources, but it does require some focused attention, and it is going to require a shift in thinking so that cybersecurity becomes a standard part of the institutional management thinking for a financial institution.
Okay. Thank you. We've received a couple questions on insurance as it relates to cyber threats and risks. A couple of people have asked if they're attacked, will insurance cover them? I think I'll just add a few points to that and say that there may be policies out there that can certainly provide some level of coverage. I think it would look to recouping events after the fact. Even the best insurance policy may not be able to recoup an institution's reputation risk or trust back in the institution with their consumers on that aspect of it. And the insurance is not going to cover the actual fiduciary responsibilities institutions have under safeguarding customer information, whether it be filing a suspicious activity report as it relates to anti-money laundering for suspicious activity. So it certainly could be something an institution can pursue, but it's not the silver bullet.
Matt, I might add to that too. And when you're dealing with cyber insurance, you have to realize a lot of these are very new products, and it's therefore incumbent upon an institution when they're looking at cyber insurance to really closely understand the requirements of it. Not uncommon for the policies to have some very specific control practices that have to be followed, and if those aren't followed, then there's no coverage. And then another element too is what is the policy limit? Sometimes the risk that could be taken could exceed the policy limits as well. So it's important to know what do I have to do to get the coverage, and how much financial coverage do I have as well.
Right. And with any coverage, obviously, there's the ongoing review of it to make sure that business strategies, changes that an institution may make to their own policies don't create implications for the actual insurance policy they may have also. So, Doreen, not surprisingly, we have a couple questions on the risk mitigation assessment program you mentioned in your remarks. Can you tell us more about this process for our callers on the line?
Sure. So I mentioned our risk mitigation assessment pilot program, and that's going to occur in two phases. The actual pilot will be conducted probably towards the middle of June into the middle of July, and we'll be using a work program at all of our examinations, so that's FDIC, Federal Reserve, NCUA, OCC, and the state. We'll use the work program at all of our examinations of institutions over about a 4-week period, and these will be institutions under $3 billion. Before that, we're going to be doing a test. The initial phase will be a test of the work program, which is going to occur later this month, and shouldn't take more than a couple of weeks. And we'll be doing some field testing of the work program. We're going to pick 3 examinations for each agency, and we'll get some feedback from the initial run of the work program. We'll incorporate any of that feedback into the actual work program itself before we run the pilot in June. And we'll use the examiners that participate in this initial testing to help us with an instructional call that we'll hold before the pilot. So that's kind of the way that's going to work.
Okay, thank you. Chris, I think this next question could be good for you. What controls are needed or expected or are most effective to mitigate the risks we've talked about today? What's the most effective way of protecting my institution?
Great question. Thanks, Matt. So controls may vary from situation to situation to determine what is right for a specific institution. I can't think of a single institution that duplicates, or, I can't think of a single scenario where you have the same kind of infrastructure between 2 banks. So the FFIEC cannot say with absolute certainty with what controls your institution will need to mitigate risk. That said, there are actions and controls discussed in our alerts and guidance that represent what the FFIEC believes to be fundamental to preparedness, and those that community institutions should contemplate and pursue as a part of operations risk management and security practices.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here on cyber attacks, which, Philip, I think I recall you having some points on that in the presentation. What kind of cyber attacks are you seeing levied against community institutions?
Well, we can't comment on any specific institution, but there's no question that corporate account takeover continues. It's actually morphed into account takeover. So instead of just attacking a company that has an account, we're seeing attacks against individuals that have large dollar balances, and thefts coming that direction. There was the FSISAC and FBI alert about attacks against small financial institutions against their wire transfer systems. And then there was the FFIEC joint statement just recently against on the distributed denial of service attacks and ATM cash out fraud. So we're seeing these target small and medium financial institutions as well as large ones, and they are ongoing. And that's the reason we're having this webinar, is to bring awareness to the industry that they are ongoing and increasing.
Okay, thank you. Bill, we have a question here for you. This person got really specific, so I'm just going to read their question and hope we can identify the part of your presentation. Under your discussion with the efforts for community institutions, the slide specified the Community Institution Council with bi-monthly calls. First question, what institutions make up that council, and how does an institution become a member? And then the second question is, how does an institution submit its name for consideration for the mentorship program linking small institutions to large institutions?
Thank you. Yeah, the Community Institution Council is really a subgroup, a circle of trust under the FSISAC. They do have bi-monthly calls. They also have a regular listserver that we link everyone to, so they can share information almost real time when attacks are happening or issues come up. So the institutions that make up the council, it's really hundreds of institutions. We added about over 100 already this year. I think we had several hundred last year, so it's gotten bigger. And you become a member, you join the FSISAC. We ask you if you want to join the Community Institution Council. Generally for institutions, community banks and credit unions under $10 billion or even $20 billion in assets. So the program, in terms of the list server sharing of information, I mentioned the XP end of life. They've shared a lot of information on that. Of course, the Heartbleed vulnerability, and more recently the Internet Explorer vulnerability that has a lot of press. You can also get involved in some other programs that we're just starting up. I'm at part of a conference that we put on in the spring, and we gave an update on the security toolkit that we've developed for community institutions. As part of that, there is a mentorship program that we're starting that would link institutions and with mentors at larger institutions to advise them on security practices. That program is just starting. If you're interested in that, you can join the FSISAC. If you're already a member, we can put your name in the queue and just contact me or Beth Hubbard, who's listed on the slides, and we can get you set up on that.
Great. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. Doreen, I'm going to come to you for the next two questions. One person wrote in and said, while the webinar provides a few steps bankers can take, what are they supposed to do related to this new cybersecurity examination procedure? Is banker guidance being prepared, or will banker guidance be prepared?
All right, so a couple of things. The work program that we're going to be piloting in June isn't intended to have an impact on institution ratings. So there's not really anything that institutions need to do to prepare for that. We are working on a brochure for community institutions that will address available resources, for how to get threat information, how to get involved in the public-private partnership, and also we're working on a glossary of terms that will go out with the cybersecurity work program. So just kind of defining all the terms that go around cybersecurity. And then I should have mentioned in response to the last question I got when I talked about the risk assessment, a key piece of the risk assessment is our regulatory self-assessment, so to identify gaps in our existing guidances and work programs. And so we're going to use that process to determine what areas of our guidance need to be updated, and then we'll do that through future updates to the FFIEC information technology handbooks or via guidance statements. So there will be some more guidance coming once we complete the assessment process, both with institutions and ourselves.
Okay, great, thank you. And then there's a follow-up question in there. A couple people have written in and understandably concerned about some potential increased regulatory burden through this process and wanted to know if we had any comments on that.
Sure. It's certainly not our intent to add burden. Our intent is to raise awareness of the risks and concerns so that institutions can continue to operate in a safe and sound manner. We were very sensitive to the regulatory burden issue. And at this point, we haven't issued any new guidance. To the extent that we do, it'll go through the normal process, and institutions will see that coming out as it would in any normal circumstance.
Thank you. Philip, I'm going to ask you to handle the next question. We've used the term infrastructure, critical infrastructure a few times today. Is there a standard set definition of critical infrastructure, or is it more a term of art?
Well, I believe the U.S. Patriot Act has a definition of it. I don't believe the FFIEC has a definition of critical infrastructure. But what's important to think about on this is sometimes when the term is used on a national stage, we're talking about something that would impact the entire nation. And when we're talking to community financial institutions, we need to keep in mind that a bank institution or financial institution in a small community is critical to that local economy. So it becomes a critical infrastructure locally. Now, the other part of the question is, what about the critical infrastructure that the institution needs to protect and assess? And that's going to be an individual decision process that the CEO has to make of what interdependencies do I have on third parties and upon networks that I need to continue to operate to continue the financial services to my local economy.
Okay, thank you. Chris, we have a couple questions here on what to do if an institution is attacked. One person writes in and says, if I'm attacked, can I get technical assistance? And someone else wanted to know if there's just basic things they should do if they do get attacked. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, Matt. So as a part of an institution's preparations, you can investigate different third parties who specialize in forensic review and analysis. But in reality, the idea here, we've already talked about it, is resilience and incident response. As a part of incident response, we don't want to be calling a third party at the 11th hour in the middle of a breach. So ideally, the institution will reach out to these third parties, create an engagement with them to understand exactly what kind of services they offer, what kind of turnaround time is associated with bringing a team on site, and making sure that they get the appropriate technical assistance. Again, the key here is not doing that in the midst of a breach or an attack, but actually engaging those third parties ahead of time and making sure that the terms are appropriate for the level of complexity of the operation and commensurate with the risk.
Okay, great. And if, we do also, I should point out too, the FFIEC member agencies have IT handbook, which has a one specifically devoted to information security as a booklet, which does kind of lay out some of the framework for that response mechanism you were talking about. Doreen, I'm going to come back to you for the next one. This person asked, what prompted the formation of the Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Working Group?
Okay. Well, you know, the cybersecurity is a growing concern for the financial services sector. I think, you know, we went through all of the reasons why during the webinar, but primarily, you know, the growing volume and sophistication of cyber attacks, the interdependencies between financial institutions, and then the overall dependencies of institutions on telecommunications and technology as part of the national critical infrastructure. So that was really the genesis behind this. And the FFIEC formed the Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Working Group to make sure that we were sharing information and assisting with ensuring a coordinated supervisory approach to address these growing cybersecurity threats.
Okay, thank you. We have a lot of people who have been asking about our comments on the third-party vendors, the vendor management aspect of it. We've had some people write in and ask for banks or credit unions that are using a hosted data processor who have their own managed network, who's liable for a data breach? And before I ask our panel to chime in on their responses, I think the first thing I think of when I think of this is, you know, the liability aspect of it is sort of separate from what our expectations as agencies are for our regulated institutions on having a process in place, objectives to safeguard consumer information, and to have response programs to address when an attack or a hack could get access to sensitive member information where the institution has a reasonable belief that the information could be used to harm that individual. So I would direct all of our listeners out there to their own respective regulated entities, rules and regulations on that. They are consistent across the board. We develop those in concert with each other under the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, and really does provide a good framework for understanding that. And those have been in place for probably going on 8 or 9 years now. So it is a good time to kind of dust those off a little bit as we're focusing on this to kind of see what changes may need to be made or what training programs need to be implemented. On the third parties themselves, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the FTC might have actually promulgated their own rules relating to safeguarding customer information for their entities that they oversee, which would be the majority of the third parties out there. So I didn't know if anyone else had some thoughts on that, but we did get a lot of questions on it.
This is Phil. I may add on that when we're talking about legal liability, I don't know that anyone knows the answer to that. If you look at court cases that have occurred over the last 18 to 24 months, you see courts rendering differing opinions as to who has liability. So I don't know that there's a clear answer to that for anyone. So it's probably an issue of the industry focusing on how do I prevent as much as I can and put the emphasis there.
Okay. And I would remind people, too, if you do want to submit a question, you can use the Ask a Question feature on the through the system here. We're trying to queue up some right here. And there was another one, too, I wanted to follow up on because it touches on the one we just talked about. We talked about the legal responsibility for that, which, again, getting back to the insurance-related question, again, that would recover or recoup some of the financial loss for a potential attack. It doesn't actually help out with the reputation risk, per se, on that. But we have received other questions from people on the line who are asking what they can do to look at their vendors and ways they can ask their vendors to actually account for this and how they would either respond to incidents or basically just ensure that they're protecting information also. And I would refer people back to the safeguarding guidelines that we talked about. In there, we do talk about expectations of our institutions to actually require their vendors to maintain similar steps or processes to achieve those same objectives. So for a small institution, they may say, I'm a small institution, how am I going to be able to get a large vendor to do what I want to do to protect my information? They don't have to do the same thing, but they have to employ methods that will still meet the objective of safeguarding that information. So that's an important distinction, I think. Some people have asked, are we aware of any legislation that's coming down the pipeline that may touch on this issue at all? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Anybody aware of anything? Okay. Chris, I'm going to ask you if you can handle this one. Should a bank develop a policy on cyber threats and intrusion so we are prepared to address these threats as they occur, or is each intrusion so unique that a universal policy would not be applicable and a risk-based response is needed to each intrusion?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So in terms of customizing a policy and an approach, that's going to be very difficult. What we've seen in the sector is that as soon as particular controls are developed and adopted and implemented, the criminals will take a different approach. So a great example there is the DDoS attacks. They were conducted using a certain component of the internet protocols. Over time, those attacks morphed and changed. So it proves very definitively that the criminals are capable of adapting to attacks. And that's precisely the reason why it's going to be very difficult to create universal policies or universal controls to try to address each particular risk or attack on an institution. In general, what the regulators have agreed to is a risk-based approach that includes a thorough risk assessment based on the infrastructure, the IT environment, and building controls appropriate, we mentioned earlier, commensurate with the level of risk and complexity of services. So great question, but it's there's no universal policy or no universal approach to creating controls.
Okay. I think we have time for just about one more, and this one seems really relevant, and maybe each of us want to kind of see if we have any perspective on this. Given what we've talked about today in terms of the threats, the risk mitigation strategies, the public-private partnership, what are the top 3 areas an institution can focus on immediately leaving this webinar this afternoon? And Philip, I'll ask you to start.
I'll list my top one, and that is tone from the top, changing the corporate culture. Establishing a culture so that employees think about cybersecurity when they're looking at each transaction and looking at new products and services. That would be, in my mind, the foremost thing that needs to be done.
Okay. Chris, anything?
Sure. I would think that security intelligence is going to be a very important component of that. Tone from the top needs to be informed. Clearly, the CEOs need to buy into the importance of managing cyber. Then the next step would be for the other folks in the bank to get the appropriate threat intelligence and sources of threat information, be that FFIEC or other sources, so that they can appropriately build their control structure.
Doreen?
I would say, incident response plans and really practicing those plans. So knowing how your plan works in your institution when something happens, knowing your escalation procedures, knowing who has the responsibility, what are everybody's roles, thinking about how you're going to communicate with stakeholders, who are the stakeholders, depending on what happens, it may be different, but actually working through all of that so that you've got a protocol down pat if something happens.
Okay, great, thank you. So we're at the bottom of the hour here. On behalf of the entire FFIEC team, I want to thank you for your attention today and for participating on this webinar. We hope this is the first of many FFIEC-hosted industry events to come. And now I'd like to turn things back over to Eric to close out our session this afternoon. Eric?
All right, thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for joining us. A lot of good information there. Thanks for all the questions. I do want to remind folks, if you are on the webinar, at the very bottom, there's a materials tab. You can click that and get a PDF version of the presentation. We had a few folks asking questions, again, just how to get that off of the webinar. So with that, we will wrap up. Guys, thank you all very much. Have a great day, and we will hopefully talk to you guys next time.